Welcome to our latest of the 9 dialogues on religion and journalism, presented by the International Association of Religion Journalists. Today's dialogue is on the religion in the 2020 U.S. election, and well, first let me just introduce you to the IARJ for those of you who are new to it. This is the 9th dialogue, all of which the previous dialogues from various corners of the world, all led by local regional journalists, are available online at the IARJ website. And the IARJ is a unique collection of several hundred journalists from 90 nations, with no group of with no one from any one nation representing more than 5% of our membership. Our 11-member board consists of people from every continent. We only added our first member from the US 3 years ago, so it's quite a unique organization among organizations that call themselves international. We truly are international. But it was our international members who were particularly intrigued by this unusual election. Crazy might be another word, but so we're grateful for a wonderful panel of journalists that I've known for many decades. 3 of the best journalists on religion who will be here to discuss this question. And I'll just introduce you as we go individually. But we'll start off with Julia Dean. Julia is a Seattle-based journalist who worked as a full-time reporter for major papers such as the Houston Chronicle and the Washington Times. She has served as the Stedden Chair, a journalism professor at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. She specializes in covering international women in religion, including President Trump's advisor, Paula White, in a lengthy piece in the Washington Post Sunday magazine. She's published 6 books, the latest being In the House of the Serpent Handler, The Story of Faith and Fleeting Fame in the Age of Social Media. And it's an honor to have you here, Julia. And this is a question we'll ask to all of our participants, an opening question. What were one or two of the most striking takeaways about the role of religion in this election? Something that may have surprised you, or in this case, even shocked you a bit, given the outcome.
One thing was kind of interesting that despite the loss of President Trump, the GOP success in down ballot races, those of you who don't know the meaning of down ballot, that means races that aren't presidential, that are regional or state. And what was very interesting is how conservative women did. And the conservative women tend to be religious of some sort. I think they're either some sort of Catholic or Protestant. I am not aware of any Muslim women who would have been part of this group, but please correct me if there was one. I don't know of one, but anyway, they were of the Christian variety, all of whom opposed abortion. And what was so interesting here is that in the House, there were 11 of these pro-life incumbents. They all won re-election, and 16 new ones were re-elected. So their numbers more than doubled. And many of these women defied polls. They flipped seats held by Democratic incumbents, or they replaced Republican predecessors. And this is not reported on much. You didn't hear much about this. I heard very little about it. The final count of these women will depend on whether Senator Kelly Loeffler is going to be reelected in Georgia next month. For those of you outside the United States, there's a huge race going on in Georgia to determine whether the U.S. Senate will be led by Republicans or Democrats. So that was really a surprise. I didn't know that. By the way, one thing about me, I am based in a very very, very liberal part of the country. I'm out of Seattle, which we just call a one-party state, quite frankly. It's just basically Democrat in every way. So one other thing I wanted to note was Hispanic voters, deeply religious group. A lot of people thought they'd go for Biden, though, because of immigration, but a lot went for Trump. 55% of the Cuban vote in Florida, to be exact. So just to say, the media and many Democrats are very clueless about the needs and wants of this demographic, and no one has figured them out by far.
Well, thank you, Julia. And David Crum, another lifelong friend and outstanding journalist. David is known nationwide to journalists and authors who cover the impact of religion and cross-cultural issues in our world today. For many of us, we first met David with his outstanding work, the Detroit Free Press. But in nearly 40 years as a journalist, David has won top awards as a senior fellow with several universities and nonprofits, including the University of Michigan, Knight Wallace Journalism Fellowship, and the Washington, D.C.-based East-West Center. He has reported from Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. And in 2010, David circled North America by van and produced a series of syndicated newspaper columns called The American Journaling. Welcome, David. And David, we would ask you the same thing. What surprised you about the role of religion in this election?
I think you've got a great panel here, David. And Julia, I really appreciated your remarks and what further remarks you'll bring. I have known Julia for a long, long time, and I have not known Richard quite as well as a colleague, but certainly have Richard's books on my shelf and know his research work really well, and he's always been somebody I admire, so this is a great dialogue. I'm going to start from a different perspective. There is lots of analysis to be made of religion in terms of specifically driving voting in early November. What participants who may screen this in other parts of the world may not be aware of is that the United States is disproportionately religious. Different research reports express this in different ways, but among wealthy first world nations, the U.S. is disproportionately religious. Our amount of religiosity makes us look similar in sociological studies to countries like maybe Iran or Pakistan. And so religion in America takes many forms related to the political forces that are going on in the US. So I'm going to mention two things that I think are directly related to this topic of religion and politics. My perspective is a little different. As Julia has mentioned, she's worked widely with news media. I have too, but I'm now working in the realm of book publishing and to some extent multimedia publishing. We have never seen the tidal wave of interest in Black authors and Black stories. David Gushee, who used to be called America's leading evangelical ethicist, the evangelicals kind of kicked him out.
Excuse me, David?
Yes.
Well, I'm the last person to be a moderator because I can't be a guy to keep people to 1 or 2 minutes, but if I would like to keep everyone going here. So what, may I ask just what surprised, and I didn't mention that David is the editor-in-chief of Read the Spirit, a wonderful publication.
Okay, yeah, so let me just throw two things on the table and then I'll be done. I think the direct surfacing of Black stories, narratives, voices, figures in American media is a direct result of religion and politics this year. Also, the huge interest in rescuing women, particularly in America's religious history from obscurity. I've never seen anything like it in American publishing in 13 years of working in the publishing field. I think that relates directly to the mix of religion and politics this year. And that's me.
Well, thank you, David, and on to my religion research great friend, Richard Semino. Sometimes Richard and I are, well, most of the time, Richard and I are the only two journalists at the major meetings of the academic studies of religion. And Richard does just this wonderful job with a publication you may be familiar with, Religion Watch. He's a journalist, author, and sociologist. He is editor and publisher of Religion Watch, which, which monitors trends in research in contemporary religion. He has worked extensively as a researcher and freelance writer for various publications. He's also a sociology professor, going from journalism to receive his doctorate in 2008 from the New School for Social Research. And his books include Atheist Awakening, Secular Activism, and Community in America with Christopher Smith of Notre Dame. Welcome, Richard. And Richard, may I ask you the same question? What were a couple of takeaways from this election that surprised you? And all of you, because I'm not going to be, I'm not going to do this very much, but please keep the answers to like 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, and thanks for inviting me. I should note though that Chris Smith is not the one from Notre Dame. He's
okay.
A friend from graduate school, but he's a different Christopher Smith.
Two great Christmas. Okay.
But I would kind of echo Julia's remarks about when she noted Latinos showing a greater, Republican response than was expected. And I would even broaden that to other minorities, religious minorities. They have even noticed the growth of Muslim vote for Trump, which was very surprising if you consider, the Muslim ban and the way his administration was perceived as, antagonistic toward Muslims. But we did see, I'm not exactly sure the percentage, but it was a greater growth than was the case in 2016, which is interesting. So I've heard a lot about how religious minorities, Orthodox Jews, are kind of moving in that direction of the Republican Party more. And so it's kind of interesting to see what will happen in the future if you take away Trump's kind of divisive personality, if this is going to continue. That's what I would be interested in seeing. Latinos, other groups, and how they're kind of maybe perceiving that the Democrats aren't that friendly to faith and moving more toward the Republicans in that direction.
Thank you, Richard. David, Richard mentioned the Muslim vote, and what was one of the things that was very interesting in the results, and you've lived in, it's your hometown, and you've lived in and reported from Michigan for so many years. How significant was the Muslim vote in that close election in Michigan, and did it surprise you at all?
It's not as though we saw Muslims as a tidal wave for Trump, but the core Muslim community, particularly active Muslims, have the same social conservatism that white evangelicals have. And so there's a natural affinity, pro-business, reduce government restrictions, conservative socially. So it fits. I know Republican Trump voting Muslims locally here, although some of those Republicans did not vote for Trump. One major community leader, Victor Begg, who is a leader both in Michigan and in Florida, and it was known as Mr. Republican for years, very pointedly told people in op-ed pieces he was not supporting Trump. So it's a mixed, complex community, but there are natural affinities with the Trump message in terms of social conservatism and freedom of businesses.
Well, thank you, David. Julia, you talked a bit about the evangelical and religious conservative vote, and in terms of the gains they made. But Julia, why do you think Biden was so successful in making small but significant inroads compared to Hillary Clinton in 2016? Like, for example, among white Catholics, Trump's margin in 2016 declined from 33 to 15%. In the key state of in flipping Georgia, uh, uh, Democrats, Biden made significant gains from 5% from 2016 to 14% in 2020.
You know, I think in the election was flipped in 2016. It wasn't like people were voting for Trump, they were voting against Hillary. But in 2020, I don't think they were voting for Biden, they were more voting against Trump. So I want to answer your question, I want to bounce off something Richard said. And it's a quote from Samuel Rodriguez. He's a Latino evangelical pastor. And he said that the evangelicals should view the election as a win for their priorities, even though the lead guy lost. And he said where the evangelicals fell short wasn't their agenda of the pro-life stuff, the various things on the conservative agenda, but it was a rejection of Trump, of the personality of Trump. And he said, looking ahead, Rodriguez said, if we can reconcile the message and the messenger, the future will be pretty amazing. In other words, to be quite blunt, if we can get someone decent to run for the Republican platform, who's not crazy, you can see kind of where I'm coming from on Mr. Trump. You've got some pretty interesting personalities, because as Richard said, and as David's been saying too, our country is socially conservative. The majority is conservative. Of some sort, or centrist conservative. And so if you can just get that whole demographic up and voting for you, you've got the election.
Thank you, Julia. And Richard, you've done some excellent work and writing, across the religion spectrum, but you have a special knowledge about the secular vote. And it seems like for this election, the secular and many in the liberal camp kind of just did anything possible to defeat Trump. But may I ask what what did you see in the secular vote for that helping Biden win? And what do you think in the future they'll be expecting? And also, Richard, could you please explain that the religiously unaffiliated is not this huge block, but while atheists are demonstrated to be particularly reliable voting bloc for liberal Democrats, and to a certain degree agnostics, but half of that religiously unaffiliated vote is a little bit more up in the air for both parties. But Richard, I'll let you just comment on what you choose to in that area.
Right. Well, yes, when we speak about, the unaffiliated, they're definitely, if you're speaking about, atheists and agnostics, I know the population, the percentage would something be like 6 or 7% of atheists and not agnostics. Generally, that's even liberal, where some would say 4 or 5%. But still, if you think about the nones, the NONES, the non-affiliated, we're speaking about, people who believe in God, a certain percentage of them. I would say, definitely there are more of those than there would be, strictly atheists. So we have a very mixed bag of people who are, believe in God, even see themselves as spiritual in some sense, but they're institutionally unaffiliated or non-affiliated. So if we look at the younger people today, we're speaking about something like 35, 40% of younger people are in this category, but a lot of them, wouldn't call themselves atheists or agnostics. And so how that translates into the vote, it does seem like, you can definitely count on the atheists and agnostics being Democrat. They probably would want more secularism than Biden offers. As far as, Biden does make a lot of faith references. He speaks about himself as a church-going Catholic, even if conservative Catholics, would criticize that. And so I think, he is, he's trying to inject some faith element. I'm just not sure about the constituency as far as, a lot of them want a secular approach. And even if you look at young people, they're kind of more critical of religious freedom claims, than the older Americans. So it's interesting to see just how this will play out as far as things like religion in public affairs, in public life. I mean, there does seem to be a segment of Americans that want a more secular approach, and then another segment, that want more religion in public square. And so as far as, how much polarism is there, polarity, that's a big question today. But it does seem like we're very split as far as, a lot of these questions. The Supreme Court, all those things came to the surface in the last few months. And so, it is going to be very interesting, what plays out. But, I think, the Senate being split, the Supreme Court, even though it's tilting more toward, greater religious expression, does reflect the population. And so that's, definitely the case where you see in the government, this reflection of how split we are in the country. Yeah. So it's not definitely atheism versus believers, but there is more of a secular approach, even among, the large group of nuns who believe but aren't involved in religion, in institutions.
Well, thank you, Richard. Well, may I ask any of the panelists who would care to, well, Julia, you mentioned, if you, what a decent candidate can do in terms of having enough to take a majority of the vote. Do you see any hope in Joe Biden's election, or of him trying to reach out to different groups and not playing to a base, is there any hope for a less polarized nation with Joe Biden?
Oh, I think so. Absolutely. I think just about any other of the Democratic nominees would have made for a much more polarized place. Joe Biden was really the best the Democrats felt they could do. As centrist a person as they could put up, and still keeping their base and trying to woo various Republicans. Yeah, I think there's a lot of hope. I don't know how Biden's going to play out with the Catholic bishops, who are right now still debating on whether they're going to give him communion or not. But right now, that doesn't seem to be an issue, like it was with John Kerry. And being that he's just a one-term president, I mean, this is so interesting what's going to be happening. So, he can experiment around because he's not going to try to run again for re-election. So in a way, he doesn't have to be super left of center. He doesn't have to worry about keeping his base. He's out the door in 4 years.
David or Richard, does Biden give you hope in any sense, particularly as we watch what Trump is doing and trying to denounce the results of the election?
I think it would be interesting, if he, he kind of borrowed ideas, from some, more religious groups and gave them, I think, the idea is a lot of religious groups are worried about freedom. And so, will he kind of crack down on things like, healthcare, Catholics, having to accept things about reproductive freedom and, those types of questions. So if he can kind of allow for kind of more freedom of these groups to kind of carry on their lives, how they go about things. And also, obviously he has kind of a left of center agenda, but if he allows for that kind of space, I think, for religious groups, where they didn't, under Obama, they perceived that there was more, at least, restrictions taking place. But if you can allow for that, which, Democrats can do and have done, I think that would put him in a good place and at least give him some standing among, you know, other religious groups, even some conservative groups. So, you know, I see some hope there if he can do that.
David, you're a hopeful guy. Are, is the country, is there a possibility for moving from this this deadlock of extreme liberal and conservative positions?
Oh, I think that the tone already is changing. I mean, I read multiple front pages every day, and suddenly there's a conscious decision not to cover everything that the president tweets. And so suddenly, you know, his latest tweet has fallen off the front page of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the major newspapers, and so forth. And I think when Biden gets in office, it's going to be like a breath of fresh air just from that alone. I do think that journalists who are trying to cover this mix of religion and politics, though, have to recognize that religion, you know, as journalists, we are historians without benefit of reflection. And folks like Richard and others can then go in and do the research and really tell us what happened based on detailed research. This was a pivotal year for congregations because where most congregations live in America, you know, most congregations in America are 100 and some people, and they're just trying to keep the doors open. They're trying to figure out how to worship virtually. Many of them barely had a website in February, and their concerns, you know, the majority of congregations in America are not politically polarized. It may be that all the members in the congregation tend to go one way or another, but you know, the research shows that politics isn't coming from the pulpit every Sunday in most congregations in America. And this whole year was spent on just trying to figure out how to stay open, right? So I think we're going to see lots of different things emerging in 2021. I think the left and the right will be less polarized because there is less fuel being thrown on the fire from Trump. But boy, this year, there are going to be tons and tons of research projects done on what changed in religion in America in this year.
Again, I'd like to ask all of you to, if you could look at, well, and let me preface that by saying before I forget, some of our international members were also interested in how abortion has played a major role in this campaign. And so, but on the larger question of how have secular journalists covered this election and past elections in terms of seeing everything in politics and not and also I think to some degree of fairness, there has to be a recognition that some of the major newspapers, many of the major newspapers like the LA Times and the Washington Post and the New York Times, I think upon reflection, have taken their stand on some of these issues, particularly abortion. And they've also tended to view religion through that frame of everything is politics. So let's just take, has there been any, have you seen any movement this year in terms of journalists trying to recognize differences among religious groups, trying to accurately depict their faith, and kind of moving away and on issues such as abortion to be more fair, to be quite frank, because it's very clear that many people in America, and for good reason, just do not trust much of the mainstream media when anymore, and are getting their news from different media. But are we seeing, with the more moderate standard bearer for the Democratic Party, and with some degree of reflection from how they may have played an unhelpful role 4 years ago, any more degree of fairness in, of journalists' coverage, particularly of more conservative religious groups, but also I would love to also see people forget about the Catholic bishops. I mean, they do not represent, and they haven't represented for 40 years the Catholic laity, and they've been, they're never more, they have never left less of a moral standing, given the last 40 years of their actions and up until today on sexual abuse. And Catholics have always, for the most part, made their own decisions on these issues. It's not a top-down deal. Well, I'm becoming long-winded myself, but are we seeing any more attempts by journalism to depict religion as it is lived in the pews or the mosque or the synagogue, and to be and have the same journalist ethics of fairness with issues such as abortion?
Let me answer the one on abortion. Okay, I'll deal with that right first. For instance, the abortion vote seems sort of, even though there were a lot of pro-life women elected to Congress, votes on abortion initiatives were split because voters in Louisiana, this is a state in the South for all of you non-Americans, they approved a constitutional amendment to prevent state courts from finding a right to abortion. So abortion, the anti-abortion people won in Louisiana, but they lost in Colorado, where 59% of the voters defeated a proposal to ban late-term abortions, that's abortions more than 22 weeks. To answer your other question, you know, Trump showed up at a Right to Life rally on January 22nd in Washington, D.C. He was the first U.S. president to do so. The pro-lifers were absolutely amazed that Trump would do that because all the other presidents, even the conservative ones like Bush, never did it. And he was called by the media that he was hopelessly pandering to the conservatives, whereas nothing that Biden did was judged to have ulterior motives. So to answer your question is, has the press gotten any fairer? Have they done better at showing religious folks? I think there was some really good there was some long form reporting this year. I saw people going out trying to talk to folks outside of the New York, Washington bubble, trying to get where these people were from. There were some of the major media people, I would say more print media than TV, made some efforts to do so. But I will say, not that it worked real well, because I still think many media are fairly clueless what happens outside of big cities. And the media filter bubble's just getting worse. Like, I mean, now Trump supporters feel like Fox News is too liberal, and they're going to places like Newsmax, which is like some of these like crazy right of center sites. So I'm not sure what little media did to try to you might even out the playing field really did much good, because and I want to end with this. Conservatives basically bolted the mainstream media like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. They left. Most of my friends where I live are pretty conservative. No one reads a daily newspaper. They don't even read the Seattle Times. So much less the Wall Street Journal or any of the other New York Times. No one reads that. So, you know, they're out the door. That horse has left the stable.
Well, you know, what always has kind of amazed me is that a lot of different groups, including organizations that pretend to be impartial, have a great deal of difficulty with this issue. The truth is that 80% of Americans, for example, in the prestigious General Social Survey, say they do not approve of federal funding of abortion, but 80% of Americans would, in very early stages and for certain reasons, would be in favor of legal abortion. It's really, Americans themselves are extraordinarily divided and see this as a deeply ethical issue, and the political parties have want 100% voting records from the interest advocacy groups. But I'm so anyway. That's I'm wondering, Richard or David, if you have any thoughts on whether we'll be able to talk as a nation about the abortion issue. One way I would start, by the way, is not saying anti-abortion and abortion rights. I mean, at first they'd use a common language that doesn't immediately negatively reflect on one group and positively reflect on another. But anyway, Richard or David, do you have any thoughts on this as to whether on such a contentious issue there may be an opening in politics for a reasoned conversation?
I mean, I think, if you look at even mainline churches, they're kind of more moderate than, if you look at some, left Democrats as far as abortion. So there seems to be a religious center, you can claim, it wouldn't be kind of on the pro-life, strict pro-life side or the pro-choice side. So it's a matter of just kind of, giving space to that center that they can express themselves. As you said, 80% would question federal funding of abortion. So I think, I think you need kind of the space to say that. Maybe the media, just how they portray things as far as the culture war, as being, evangelicals, anti-abortion, mainline Protestants, pro-choice. It's a lot more complex than that. But, I think, going to the argument about the media, you have to kind of show that taking place. And so I pointed at New York Times' big treatment of Christians in Sioux City, Iowa, that I just thought wasn't, it kind of portrayed very far-right evangelicals and tried to make that seem like all the evangelicals over the summer, this media treatment they gave to that. And I just thought it just, didn't reflect church life in that particular part of Iowa. I'm in New York, but still, you know that there are a lot of Christian Reformed churches and Reformed churches in America that are more moderate, and you just didn't have any sense of that. It was all, these kind of separatist Calvinist bodies that are very strongly pro-life, and, that seemed to be the picture they were creating about evangelicals. And, if you create that picture, then you're going to make people react against it. And I think that's the problem, just trying to show the complexity in the media and letting people kind of acknowledge that, for themselves. And, so that's what I hope you would see more of. But like Julia said, so many people are, just alienated from the press, from any kind of common type of media that where they, people can express themselves, across the board. So that's the problem, that people are just disenchanted with, mainstream media as a whole. Where do people, where's that open forum, and it's hard to find an open forum nowadays, it seems.
I think
Thank
Julia
you.
was, I think Julia was spot on in pointing out the context, particularly for anyone who's watching this outside the U.S. On this call, and I think among our colleagues in the IARJ, we're all news junkies, and I look at a half a dozen newspapers every morning, and I filter what I'm reading and so forth. But the average everyday American is picking up news items that come in through Facebook, or they're picking up news items that come in. Heck, we have video screens now when you fill your gas tank that give you news reports while you're filling your gas tank, trying to sell you a hot dog in addition to news. The one thing I wanted to say is there may have been some journalists I missed who did wonderful reporting on Justice Comey as she was nominated and very rapidly pushed onto the Supreme Court. What I saw, I was very disappointed in. And I was disappointed because earlier in my career, I did extensive, back when newspapers could do major projects, I spent half a year reporting on those charismatic Catholic communities, both in Michigan and in her area. And I think what they did is they went back and found clips from that era and dumped them into the reporting and said, that's the way she is today, which is just nuts. It just isn't fair. I'm certainly no Comey apologist. I'm no Trump supporter, but I think the coverage of her religious background was what I saw. There may have been a journalist in our connection who did great stuff that I missed, but I just mourned for religion writing when I saw that coverage.
But there's so much more I'd like to get into, and I'd just like to share with you people around the world. I know these people, I know all of these people on this panel individually and as journalists, and you're meeting three wonderful human beings in this dialogue. But before we close, can we just each of us give final reflections as we look forward to the future and issues that you see that you'll be interested in following in the next 4 years in religion and politics. And I think we promised we'd be done about in 5 minutes. So, but please, I'd be grateful for each of your summing up remarks. Julie, do you want to start us?
Okay, thank you. One thing to watch, what's going on right now, are the people who are really fighting Trump conceding. And I think this is going to be a story that's going to keep on going on, even though when he finally does step down, as I think he will, unless something totally bizarre happens. But it's the group of, I've been following the Pentecostals and Charismatics. They're an extremely interesting group. Paula White, the president's pastor, is like the best known one. But there's a truckload of people who are really the spiritual force backing Trump's refusal to concede. And they're all over the place. I mean, they're doing broadcasts, they're doing prophecies that he's not going to lose. It's just amazing to watch. And I wish more, I've been trying to get more reporters to cover it. I'm not the only one out there covering this stuff and begging people, please get on this. There's people in your area. I mean, everyone from, this pink woman with pink hair called Kat Kerr from Jacksonville, Florida, to Pat Robertson, to, here's the other guy in Florida, the Tampa preacher who got put in jail for having church services during COVID, and, folks out of Bethel Church in California, Charlie Shamp, who's this self-declared prophet out of North Carolina, Eric McTaxis, a lot of you've heard of him, who is swearing up and down that, God's going to give Trump victory. This is an interesting group to follow once, Trump does leave the stage. And because Pentecostal charismatic stuff is, known worldwide. It's a movement that's the fastest growing in Christianity. Really watch that as they stay involved in politics, as they have very suddenly in this country gotten involved, and they're going to stay involved. So keep looking for that, and I'm going to keep on reporting on that. Well,
thank you. Richard, would you like to, and Richard, may I also ask you in particular, there's so many, no one knows the future, but there are so many different directions this country is moving. There's certainly an increase in secular, an increase in religious unaffiliated, but there's also an older growing group, which is more religious and perhaps somewhat more conservative, and the demographic groups that are growing, the Hispanic and the Muslim and Catholics, other than in the Rust Belt and New England, they're growing. It doesn't seem like we're going to become either a secular or a much less religious nation, but how do you see this happening in the future and the issues in religion and politics coming up?
I think, you're right that it's going to remain polarized for a while. So any kind of politician, wanting support will have to kind of draw on that or acknowledge it. So it's going to be very tricky, I think, moving forward as far as appealing to which group. They thought that, they talk about white Christian nationalism, a term I'm not that crazy about, just to, categorize a whole group of Protestants. But now it seems that the conservative tendencies might also grow among other groups, Hispanics, even African Americans. We saw some movement in the Republican direction. So that will be the interesting thing as far as this shift, and I don't think it's going to be as kind of racially defined as a lot of people have been saying. So that's something I think to keep an eye on. Is there kind of be more of a working class, without Trump, coalition that has conservative social values, that's able to attract, poor Latinos, African Americans, Muslims, and will something like that take shape in the next few years? But as Julia said about the Pentecostals, I think I've also seen some growth of conservative Catholics who are moving in, have moved in a Trumpian direction, which is interesting. You hear Bishop Biagio from Italy, a controversial bishop who's criticized the Pope, and he's being seen as kind of this new leader among a lot of these very conservative Catholics, and they're speaking about things like deep state that you never really heard conservative Catholics speaking about, or going against immigration, which seems strange for Catholics. So keep an eye also on this group of kind of right-wing Catholics, and what's going to be happening with them also. Not as numerous as probably the charismatics, but still I see that developing, where kind of a Trumpian form of Catholicism is emerging.
That's interesting. And David, saving the best for last, my friend. Well, Dave,
Sorry. Yep, I'm now got audio. So in the United States right now, Americans are receiving their news, their nonfiction in many forms. And there are a tremendous number of folks who perhaps once were in journalism or related fields who have now moved into writing books or producing documentaries. I'm working with two different coalitions of journalists, regional and national, that are trying to enable each other to move in those directions. And one of the things I think you're definitely going to see are more African-American voices coming to the forefront in that media, that in books, it's called adult trade nonfiction. And some of these folks essentially are journalists just in this new format, or are finding empowerment to produce documentary films through some networks that are newly emerging. I think one thing to watch is new African-American voices coming out of America's religious community and finding new avenues to be heard. Also women. We're seeing not only contemporary women, but also women who have been missing in action for more than 100 years in many cases. So you're going to see more women coming to the forefront and more African-American voices specifically. I think that's a great thing to watch in the new year.
Well, David, thank you. And thank you, Julia and Richard. And thank all of you online for joining us. We're very grateful. And we hope you'll be interested in going back and looking at some of the other dialogues and coming onto the IARJ website, the IARJ.org, to look at all the great resources it has to offer. Well, again, very grateful for all my friends on this panel, and well, good night, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you. And we're done.